Hello and welcome to Passing Priority. My name is Mike, and today I have a deck tech built around a new legend from Modern Horizons 2. Grist the Hunger Tide is a 3-mana Golgari Planeswalker. However, it can be your commander. Official rules as to why are still to come out, but in my opinion this is because it has a static ability that makes it a legendary creature while not on the battlefield. Grist has 3 abilities. Its +1 creates a 1/1 black and green insect creature token, and then mills us a card. And if the card milled is an insect, we put a loyalty counter on Grist and repeat this process again. This is a great ability as it provides Grist with blockers and protects him and fuels the graveyard for us. Its -2 has us sack a creature, and when we do, we can destroy a creature or planeswalker. Having a removal option attached to our commander is always useful in a pinch. And its -5 will have each opponent lose life equal to the number of creatures in our graveyard. Since Grist enters with 3 loyalty, this is a potential win condition for the deck. Grist's abilities do give us a clear path to the deck we want to build, with its +1 being our main focus. This deck will be an insect themed deck with the goal to create a swarm of insects to protect ourselves as we take our commander up to drain our opponents. Let's start with our ramp. Since we are in green, we can rely on land-based ramp in the forms of Cultivate, Kodama's Reach and Rampant Growth. We also have a Primal Growth, which we can play for 2 and a green to fetch a basic land, but its kicker cost of sacrificing a creature to get a second land will be fairly easy to achieve in this deck. We have a Myriad Landscape and Blighted Woodland in our mana base for some ramp using our lands. We have 2 Artifact Mana Rocks, Soul Ring because Soul Ring, and a Golgari Signet. Not the most efficient mana rock, but it can be transformed into an insect creature with Death Touch for 2 mana if we need to threaten blocks. And a final mana dork of Nantuko Elder, an insect that can tap to add a colourless and a green. Let's see next how we plan to keep our swarm growing. Our plan is to flood the board with many insects, so we can use them to draw more cards. We have some cards that for an additional cost of sacrificing a creature or 2 will draw us cards. These are Altar's Reap, Costly Plunder, Village Rites, and Bankrupting Blood. Plumb the Forbidden, at its base value, will be a 2 mana draw a card, but for each creature we sacrifice at an additional cost, we will get to copy this spell. Importantly, this is an instant, making a great card to hold up if we feel a board wipe is coming. We have Vampiric Rites, an enchantment that will cost 2 mana and sacrificing one of our insects to gain a life and draw a card. Moldavine Reclamation will trigger anytime a creature we control dies, gaining us 1 life and drawing a card. And when Species Specialist enters the battlefield, we will need to choose a creature type, being insects in this deck. And when an insect dies, we may draw a card. And finally, any deck that makes a lot of 1/1 creatures would not be complete without Skullclamp. Attaching it to a 1 toughness creature kills it and draws us 2 cards. We've already talked a lot about using our insect tokens for value, but our commander is not the only way we have to make tokens. We have some one-off effects that are either spells or creatures that make tokens as they enter or die. 1 Dozen Eyes is a simple way to make a quick burst of insects, 6 mana for 5 insects, and if we want the extra beast we can get that for an additional 3 mana. It of the Horror Swarm on cast will make us 2 insects, and it's an insect itself, and we can also cast it for its emerge cost by sacrificing another creature and reducing its emerge cost by the sacrificed creature's mana cost. Azoni 1,000 Eyes will, on entering the battlefield, make a number of insects equal to the number of creature cards in our graveyard. She is also a sack outlet that for 2 mana will gain us a life and draw a card. Symbiotic Beast has been errated to be an insect, and on its death will generate us 4 insect creature tokens. But the most well-known insect maker is probably Hornet Queen. Entering the battlefield and making 4 insects with Death Touch and Flying, and being a Death Touch flying creature herself will make our opponents think twice before sending any attacks our way. Having a swarm of insects is going to help protect our commander, but if our opponents want to attack us, we have some insects that excel in keeping us protected. Hornet Queen, Brood Hatched Nantuko, and Saber Ant will deter our opponents from attacking us with a single big creature, because when either of these creatures take damage, we create that many insect tokens. Even if they die in the process, this could quickly make us a very large army of insects. Living Hive is the opposite of these cards. It cares about dealing combat damage to our players to create that many insect tokens, and comes equipped with Trample, meaning our opponents can't simply chump block us to stop us getting our effect. And Giant Adaphage is another large insect that on dealing combat damage will start making token copies of itself. But one of the best insects for making copies of itself has got to be Scoot Swarm. We will not be able to take advantage of this card like in a dedicated landfall deck. However, we will get an insect on each of our land drops. But if we have 6 or more lands, we will create a token copy of Scoot Swarm instead. With enough land drops, this will keep growing exponentially. Crawling Sensation will mill us 2 cards at the beginning of our upkeep. This fuels our commander's ultimate if we can keep it alive. But on the first time a land is put into our graveyard from anywhere each turn, Crawling Sensation will make us an insect. And finally, Ant Queen is a great mana sink, being an insect that can make more insects for just 2 mana. Now we've filled our board with our insect swarm, it's time to take advantage of them. We have already talked about sacking them to draw cards, but since our commander's ultimate is already draining our opponent's life, that would be the best way to use our army. Bastion of Remembrance and Poison Tip Archer will both do the same thing. Whenever a creature dies, they will drain our opponents for 1 life, and we will gain 1 life. Bastion of Remembrance only triggers on our creatures, but Poison Tip Archer will trigger on any creature dying. And Sir Conrad the Grim will trigger on any creature dying, but also when a creature card is put into any graveyard from anywhere, or a creature card leaves the graveyard, he will deal 1 damage to each of our opponents. This can be a very powerful effect, as our commander also cares about us milling creature cards. It's worth noting that if Sir Conrad is out when our commander dies, in the graveyard it is a creature card, so when the state-based action to return our commander to the command zone happens, it will trigger Sir Conrad. Finally, we have Mazarek, Kroll Death Priest, a legendary insect that will pump our board with +1/+1 counters each time any player sacrifices anything. This could be a whole host of triggers from creatures, treasure tokens, or even fetched lands. And talking about sacrificing our creatures, we have 2 insect sack outlets in Devouring Swarm and Nantuko Husk. Each can sack a creature to pump themselves. If we don't want to sacrifice our tokens, we have some bugs that love to die as they can get themselves back from the graveyard. When either Brood of Cockroaches or Endless Cockroaches die, they will return themselves to our hand. Endless Cockroaches does this automatically, and Brood of Cockroaches requires us to pay 1 life, which if we have one of our drain effects out, basically has no cost. Kroll Swarm can be returned to our hand from our graveyard by discarding a card and paying 2 and a black. Not as efficient as the cockroaches, but can be brought back if milled with our commander's ability. And Gigapede can be brought back by discarding a card, but we can only do this during our upkeep. We may also want to get some of our other creatures back, so we have some ways to recur any of our creatures. Victimize and Blood for Bones will have us sacrificing our creatures to bring others back to the graveyard. Victimize will return 2 creatures for the cost of sacrificing 1 bug, and Blood for Bones will return 1 creature to the battlefield and 1 to our hand. Deadly Brew will cause each player to sacrifice a creature or planeswalker, and if we do, we return a permanent card back to our hand. Vigor Mortis will return a creature to play, and if we pay green mana as part of this mana's cost, it will enter with 2 +1/+1 counters. And while Genesis sits in our graveyard, possibly ending up there from our commander milling it, it will allow us in our upkeep to pay 2 and a green to return a creature card to our hand. We also have 1 insect that helps with recursion in Moldgraf Monstrosity. When it dies, we are forced to exile it. Then we return 2 random creatures from our graveyard to play. The randomness isn't great, but being a large 8/8 trampling insect, our opponents will need to choose if 2 creatures from our graveyard are worth answering it. The last of our bug army don't fit into large groups, but have some small value. Kroll Forager will gain us life on entering the battlefield. Loam Lava will put a basic land on top of our library when it enters the battlefield. And Nantuko Cultivator can pitch any excess lands we have in our hand to pump itself and draw us into more insects. Vorapede can recur itself once from the graveyard with Undying, and has Vigilance as well as Trample, meaning it can be good both offensive and defensive. And Scoop Mob can become big over a couple of turns, as we can keep adding counters to it. And while not an insect, Blex Vesking Pest will provide us with an anthem for our insects. I've also included Worm Harvest. This doesn't make insects, but looking at Grist, it is likely very friendly with worms as well. Plus having more tokens to block and sacrifice is never a bad thing. The next 2 cards may scare a few people, as they include a keyword that frightens most players that aren't prepared for it: Infect. Phyrexian Swarmlord and Plague Stinger are two insects that have Infect, meaning that when they deal combat damage to an opponent, instead of them losing life, they will give them poison counters. Then when a player has 10 or more poison counters, they lose the game. And Phyrexian Swarmlord really lives up to his name, as at the beginning of our upkeep, we make an insect with Infect for each poison counter our opponents have. And to really take advantage of Infect counters, our last value creature is Plaguemore Beast, which will allow us to sacrifice a creature to proliferate. Even if we don't want to play Infect, this is a worthwhile card in the deck as it can increase our commander's loyalty. Let's end by looking at our removable. Our insects play a big role in our removal, as there are a good number of insects that like destroying things. Caustic Caterpillar is likely the most known, being able to sacrifice itself to destroy an artifact or enchantment. But each time Caustic Wasp deals combat damage to a player, it can destroy an artifact they control. Rust Scarab will destroy an artifact or enchantment controlled by any opponent that blocks it. And Heart Stabber Mosquito can be kicked on cast to destroy a creature. Carrion Beetle is an insect version of Scavenging Ooze, being able to eat away at our opponent's graveyards. And Bane of the Living is an insect that can become a board wipe using its morph ability. And there we have it, a Grist of the Hunger Tide deck, focused on Insect Tribal. A link to the decklist can be found in the description. And with Modern Horizons 2 just coming out, maybe you're excited for a different commander, let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave me a like to let me know you got to the end. And don't forget to subscribe to stay tuned for more videos in the future. And once again, thank you for listening, and goodbye for now.